If you're kind of wondering who this guy is up on stage, if we haven't had the opportunity to meet, my name is Warren East, and this is my family behind me. And I have 4 boys. Eves is our oldest. He's 25, and you're like, okay, what's the story? All right. So Eves came to live with us when he was a student in our youth ministry in Florida. So he came to us, was supposed to stay with us for 2 weeks, and it turned into 4 years. And so he just kind of became ours. And so he's in New York. He's 25. So when he comes home, he comes to us. We're mom and dad. Landon is our 10-year-old. Gage is our 6-year-old. And Maverick is our 4-year-old. And the one that just makes us all look good is my wife, Lindsay, who this past month, we've been married now for 14 years. And so we are super excited that God has brought us here to City Church, and I kind of get to share that story a little bit, Dave, of how God brought us and His faithfulness and His goodness and helped us overcome the fear in our life. And so what we get to do today is we get to continue where we've been for the past few weeks in a series called Summer in the City. And here's what we've done. We've decided to say this, okay, if we're a church that is for the city, if we're a church that's for all people, for Jesus, what we want to do is step back and we want to look at Jesus and how He encountered people and different groups, and we say this, if we can follow the way that Jesus did that, then I think we can do something right, can't we? And so what we're looking at through this series is finding how Jesus encounters these different groups of people. And so today we want to unfold Jesus' time with a group as they faced fear. Can we all just agree that fear is something that's real? Right? Now for me as a young kid, and I know this is going to sound crazy, one of my greatest fears was dinosaurs. Yeah, I know, they're not even real, right? They don't even exist on Earth anymore. But one of my greatest fears was dinosaurs, and you're like, okay, Warren, why dinosaurs? So when I was a child, I mean, I love my dad, okay? But when I was a child, we were at one of those like science and like history museums, and they had like a dinosaur section, right? And so we're in the dinosaur section, and I'm already a little timid because I'm only 5 years old. And so they have a T-Rex, and it was one of those that like moves really slow and is like, and then it kind of goes down like this. And so I just had this timid soul to me, and I'm just kind of like, okay, is this thing like really real? I don't know about this. And so I just kind of edged my way closer to it. Well, meanwhile, my dad loves me so much, right? He's in the background, and whenever the T-Rex goes to go, my dad just grabs me and goes, roar! And in that moment, dinosaurs were done for me. It was over. I wanted nothing to do with dinosaur toys. I didn't want to watch Jurassic Park. I didn't want anything to do with that. Even by the time I was married, me and my wife rode a ride in Orlando called Jurassic Park. And if you go back and look at the picture, I am buried in her shoulder because I was so scared, right? So fear is something that we all know. But doesn't something happen to all of us when we become adults? Our fears start to change, don't they? Right? I'm not fearing the dark anymore, the dinosaurs. Maybe you're still scared of the dark, right? Some of you know fear this week because you just binge watched, right? Stranger Things 3. That's all you did. Like, just raise your hand if you're there. Just admit to it. Like, I watched it all. It's done. It's over. Right? But when we become adult, our fears begin to change. We have what we call responsibility, right? And so something that we all know and we can all agree with, right? It's this fear that exists in our life. And so what do we do with that fear? And so as we talk about this story of Jesus, it's important for us to know, and we're going to unfold this entire story next Sunday. Jesus feeds 5,000 people, just over 5,000 people in a story right before we're headed. And so this crowd is with Jesus and His disciples. The disciples are this group of men that God called to follow Jesus as He spent time on here on earth, to learn and to eventually, as Jesus left, to continue what Jesus was doing. And so Jesus is with these disciples and these thousands of people, and He performs this miracle, and then He sends the crowd off. And so we pick up in this story. So if you have your Bibles, you can join me. It's on the screen, or you can grab your phones, whatever you want to do. But we're going to be in the book of Matthew, chapter 14, verse 22, and we're going to pick up in this incredible story we see in Scripture. It says this in verse 22 of chapter 14. Immediately, all right, so right after this miracle is performed, the crowd's there. Immediately, He made the disciples get into the boat and go before Him to the other side while He dismissed the crowds. And so we see this thing take place in verse 22 where Jesus does this. He says to His disciples, hey, I want you guys to get into this boat and I want you to go to the other side and I'll meet you there. And so what does Jesus do? He stays back. and he dismisses the crowd. He does the work. But it's important to know that Jesus puts these disciples in the boat. This is what he asked them to do and what he told them to do, to go. It's also important for us to know that some of the disciples were fishermen. So this would have been something they were comfortable with. It was familiar for them. They knew it. And so when Jesus was like, hey, go get in the boat and I'll meet you on the other side, for some of them it was like, okay, this is what we did before we started following you around. It's comfortable. We know it. And so we find that it's so important for us to know Jesus is the one who sets the disciples out. My family and I just moved here about 3 weeks ago. And we graduated from college in 2005, and we went right to a church in Melbourne, Florida. It was where God called us to be, and we had been there for 14 years. I'd worked with students for 7 years, and then the last 7 years, I was the associate and the worship pastor, and it was a place that we knew God had called us to and a place that he put us in for that period of time. It's a place that we love. It was the boat that he set us out into in life. And we knew that that was his call for us. And it was a place that we loved and a place that we adore, and it's a place that we still do love. But I think just like our story, right, you guys all have a boat that God's put you out into life. He sets you into motion, and he's put you purposely, just like he did the disciples that day. He's placed you in a boat, and he said, hey, go. This is where I'm putting you, and this is where I'm placing you. And so what happens in this story as it unfolds is we begin to see and learn what Jesus is up to. So Matthew chapter 14, verse 23 through 24. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And so Jesus sends the crowds away, and then he goes by himself, and he spends time in prayer. And when evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, and it was beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. So Jesus is alone, right? He's by himself. Where are his disciples? His disciples are exactly where he put them. And where are they in this midst, in this moment? They're in the boat Jesus put them in, and they're in a storm. They're in a storm. And who put them there? Jesus put them there. He set them out into motion. He put them out in the boat, and he said, hey, I'm going to go away. You guys go. And here comes the storm, right? Here comes this place that they're placed in. And guess where the disciples are in this? They're in the boat that Jesus put them in. And I think the story gets a little bit better because we begin to understand how long they were there. Matthew chapter 14 and verse 25. And in the fourth watch of the night. So the disciples are there on the boat, and then we find the time frame. And in the fourth watch of the night. Now, the fourth watch of the night, that's not language that we use, right? When someone's like, hey, what time did you go to bed last night? I went to bed at the second watch of night. They would look at you like, what are you talking about? Can you please explain? So the fourth watch of the night would have been 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. And so as we look at this time frame, Jesus feeds 5,000 people, right? And this was what we think is a dinner, right? And then evening came, okay? And then the fourth watch of the night is where we pick up with the disciples. So we're talking about 10 to 12 hours of time where they're just out on this boat and they're fighting a storm, and not only just fighting a storm, but fighting a storm in the dark. Can I ask you a question for a minute? Have you ever felt like you're in a storm, but it felt a little worse because you were in the dark? You felt maybe like you were alone, like you were by yourself and no one was there, and you looked around and there was no hope and there was no place for you to be? Can we agree this morning that for the disciples in this place, in this position, that when fear increased for them, movement decreased? You see, for us, when fear enters our life, what do we want to do? We want to sit. We want to stay put right where we're put. We don't want to go anywhere else. We want to hold tight. It's what's comfortable. It's easy. We don't want to fight against that fear. When we were at Bethany this past year in January at the church in Melbourne, Florida, the end of January, beginning of February, I began to have a conversation with Josh on the phone, and we were talking. And Josh just said, hey, I'm just going to ask. I'm going to say this. Do you want to come and be a part, you and your family, of City Church and be our city engagement pastor? And I was like, movement, boom, it stopped. Fear began to jump into my life. Well, I don't know about that. I don't know, Josh, because I've been here for 14 years and this is all we know. My kids were born here. This is where we've had all of them have memories and stories and where they've grown up. And so this fear began to stagnate the movement. I didn't really know if this is what we could do. My first thought was not, oh man, God could do awesome things. My first thought, honestly, was fear. It was, I don't know. I don't think this can work out. There was fear of leaving what was comfortable. You see, we may all be in a different place, but can we agree that we probably all have a fear in our life that is controlling us right now, and hope is shrinking? Movement is stagnant. It's keeping us from making steps forward. Why? Because here's what fear is. Fear comes from our knowledge and ability to try and predict the future. And so your fear comes from what? Your knowledge, your ability to predict the future. And so when we were asked to come to City Church, fear entered my mind because I could no longer predict the future. Because at Bethany, I knew a lot of things. I knew the path for the next 5 years. I knew where my kids were going to go to school. I knew where my wife would have a job. I knew all those pieces in part, and fear entered the picture because I began to try to take my knowledge and predict the future. And when God said, hey, maybe this is the place for you, movement stopped. I stood in place and shrieked back, and hope began to disappear. But the thing that we have to find in this story, the thing that we learned in our life, is we have to ask the question, who put us there? You see, Jesus knows what he's doing. Look at this right here, Matthew chapter 14, verse 25. Jesus puts the disciples out into the sea. The storm comes, and they've got to be asking the question, where are you, Jesus? Why did you do this? Why are we here? Matthew 14, 25, and in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. Listen, can I just proclaim this over you today? See, Jesus put the disciples there, but Jesus does this. He doesn't just put us out there, but then Jesus, he does this. He meets us where we are. And some of you right now, you're in a boat out in the storm, and you're like, Jesus can't get to me. There's no way he can make it to me. My storm is too great. My situation is too hard. There's no way that Jesus can come to me. He's not going to meet me where I am. He doesn't know the things I've done in the past. He doesn't know the things that I'm struggling with in the present. He can't meet me where I am. But can we just sit in this a moment that Jesus put them out, and then Jesus comes to them on the water, and he meets them where they are? It sounds maybe a little bit hard, but can I say this? Jesus knows where to find you. He does. And your mama used to use that against you, right? Jesus knows where to find you. I might not see it, but Jesus can, right? Right? But can I just take that for a second? Because I think sometimes that was used to like say, he's got you underneath his hand. No. He's meeting where you are. He's pursuing you. He wants to be close. He wants to be near. He wants you to know him. And so his pursuit of you is not what you may think. It's so that you may know his love, because he knows there's nothing greater. For me and my wife, we began to pray through coming to Griffin. We began to talk about what would cause us to not go, to not step through the fear. And so we're sitting at a conference in Orlando called Exponential, and Exponential is a conference that's really created for church planners to grow in church planning, to know more about church planning, to network. And so me and my wife are like, hey, this is a good place for us to go. Josh and Lauren and their team was there. It was a great place for us just to know and understand more about church planning and more about what was happening at City Church. And so this was right at the beginning of March. And so we're there in the parking lot, just me and my wife, before the conference begins. And we're sitting in the car, and we began to just have this conversation. And we said, what is it that would keep us from going? And the word was fear. It was fear of something new. It was fear of leaving something that we had known for a long time. It was fear of moving our kids. It was fear of coming to a new state. It was fear of finding a school. It was fear of raising our funds to be a part of City Church. It was fear of selling our home. And the list just kept going on and on and on. And so me and my wife sat there in that car, and we just said, God, would you please just show us that we don't have to fear? And so we step into the conference, and the conference has these booths that are set up, and the booths are designed just to help church planners where they are, whether it's with audio and video or with discipleship or whatever it may be. These booths are just set up. And we walk into the door, and would you know this? There's a booth right there, and me and my wife, we stop. And so we just began to have this conversation with a guy named Tyler, and we're talking to Tyler, and Tyler just says this, hey, can I pray for you guys? And can I encourage you, if someone ever wants to pray for you, don't turn it down. You never know what God's doing in the moment of prayer. And so he begins to pray, and Jesus meets you where you are. Can we just sit there for a second? Tyler begins to pray, and my wife begins to get a little emotional, and I'm kind of starting to chime in. As you can tell, I have a problem with that. And this guy stops in the middle of his prayer, and he says this: God is telling me that you have a fear in your life right now, and he wants you to know that you don't have to fear anymore. Jesus meets you exactly where you are. In the middle of whatever it is that you're going on, Jesus meets you there. You see, it was for us in the middle of that moment that we were reminded that Jesus is pursuing you and meeting you where you are. And this is the crazy cool part of Jesus in this story. Matthew chapter 14 and verse 25. Jesus came to them walking on the sea. Jesus came to them. He came to them walking on the sea. Can I encourage you with this today, that you don't have to make it out of the storm for Jesus to find you? I think that sometimes we have this misconception that in order for Jesus to find me where I'm at, I've got to have some kind of redemption of this storm that I'm going through, that I have to get out of it for Jesus to find me. No. Jesus meets you where you are, right in the midst of the storm. And so Jesus steps out onto the ocean. He steps out into this place with the disciples, and then the disciples see him in Matthew 14, verse 26. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. They're already scared, right? They're already in the middle of the storm. They're already thinking there's no hope. And then in the distance, they see something coming. And they can't really make out what it is or who it is. And so they say, "It's a ghost." And then what else happened? They're already afraid. Then they cried out in fear again. So fear has now stacked itself up. Why? Because maybe they were thinking, there's no way in the world this is Jesus. He put us out here. It can't be him. It's not possible. They feared. Can I say this, that when we are in the boat of life and things get rocky, can we agree that sometimes when Jesus shows up, fear is our first reaction sometimes? You see Jesus coming and you think, okay, what does he want? What does he want to do? Where is he going? Where is he moving? Why this? Why this timing? Because it's something sometimes that's unexpected. When me and my wife found out in that moment at the conference, and we're standing there with Tyler, and he states, "Hey, God's telling me you have a fear in your life, and he doesn't want you to fear anymore." He states that. There was like this eye contact between me and my wife, and it was a eye contact of confirmation, like we knew, hey, God's doing this, but it was also like, oh, snap. It's about to happen. It's all about to change. Our first encounter with Jesus in that moment was fear again, because it meant stepping out of what was comfortable for us. It meant stepping into a new call for us. Is it possible that the presence of God is on the other side of your fear? Is it possible that maybe the fear that you have of Jesus right now, the presence of God in your life, that there's something incredible on the other side of that? You see, we just talked about this morning, that there's triumph somewhere in this room, that there's a step that's going to be taken. Because here's the thing, we're sometimes afraid to take that step because of the fear what's on the other side. But can I tell you that the step today, that the presence of God is on the other side of that fear? That his pursuit of you is there, that it exists, to step into that moment. For some of you, Jesus is new, or church is new. You've been hurt by the church before, and it just brings this fear to your life. May we encourage today with this in Matthew 14:27. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Take heart. It means just to take courage, to take the step. It's me, I'm here with you. Be calm, be knowing that I am here and you don't have to be afraid. Can I ask you this morning, maybe this is you, maybe this is just what you need to be. Maybe you just need to hear this. Take courage. Don't be afraid. I'm with you in the midst of the storm. I'm with you in the midst of your fear. And here's why this was so encouraging to the disciples, because they had been there before. Matthew chapter 8, verse 26 through 27. This is a previous story to where we are now. And he said to them, Jesus speaking, Why are you afraid, O you of little faith? And so here they are in a boat with Jesus. In a previous story, there's a storm, and Jesus says, why are you afraid? And he rose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. And the men marveled, saying, what sort of man is this that even the winds and the sea obey him? Can I tell you this, that your triumph isn't found in something that is small? Your triumph is found in the one who can calm the seas and the oceans. And if he can calm a sea and an ocean, how much more can he step into our lives? How much more can we take a step into trusting him? There was a calm for the disciples. They knew once they heard it was Jesus, there was this breath of fresh air. Okay, it's him. He's done this before. I know he can do it again. He's calmed the storm before. I know that he can do it again. One of the disciples that's on the boat is so confident that Jesus can do something, that he does something that we would all consider crazy. You have one of those friends that just, you're just like, why? They just do things and you're like, you are crazy. Why? Some of you have kids like that. Like, you're just like, seriously? Climbing on that at Target? Why are you doing that? What is the purpose? Okay, I know we're at Walmart and this is a great place, but why do you have to climb on the shelves? Like, just the crazy steps that you see someone take, right? And so Peter's about to be this guy that I'm sure the disciples are thinking, what? And so here's what he does. In Matthew chapter 14, verse 28. And Peter said this. He's on the boat, the storm's raging. Jesus has said, hey, it's me. And Peter says, Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. What? Really? The other disciples were probably thinking, okay, Peter, whatever, dude. I mean, if you want to drown, go ahead. But Peter does this. Matthew 14:29, he said, come to me. Jesus says, come. And so Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. I have to think for a moment that the other disciples in the boat were like, man, I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have been a part of that. I wish I would have stepped into the presence of Jesus in that. Can I tell you today, don't be the one on the boat. Take a step today. Move forward to Jesus today. Don't be that one that's back there and sitting back saying, man, I wish I would have done that. I wish I would have. Can we go back a little bit in this story? You see, because I think this is really important. Before Jesus called the disciples to follow him, Peter's job was a fisherman. Now, where would a fisherman want to stay if there was a storm? In a boat. No right fisherman in his mind would say, hey guys, it's storming outside. I'm just going to step out of this boat and I'm going to walk on this water. It's going to go great. Watch. They would stay right in the boat, right? They wouldn't move. That would be the comfortable place. That would be the place that they would stay, and they would not waver in that. But Peter knew something that moment. He knew that there was a step that had to be taken towards the one who had calmed it all before. My wife and I got to share with our church that God had called us to go. And our church in Melbourne has been so loving and so supportive to us. But after we shared the news, one of the guys in our church, he came up to me and he goes, so you have to raise your salary? And I was like, yeah. He's like, that's not smart. Why are you doing that? And so for him, he couldn't fathom and understand, why in the world would I pick up my family and move and go to a place where I had to raise my support? And if you're wondering, like, what does that mean? What are you talking about? Here at City Church, we believe that we want to be able to say yes to the city. We want to be able to say yes to the community. And so to do that in a financial standpoint, one of the things that we believe we should do here is that the first couple years, our staff should raise their support, because it allows us to say yes to the city continually. And it also does this, and this is something I'm learning. It reminds me of where my help comes from. Because let me tell you, it's easy to forget. And so as we've had this faithfulness and stepped into this, it's reminding me who the faithful one really is, and who the one that possesses all the power really is, and who the one who is pursuing me really is, right? And so in that moment, I just told him, I said, hey, listen, it sounds crazy, but I'd rather be crazy than not do what Jesus wanted me to do. I'm willing to step into it. I'm willing to go there. And he said, yeah, okay, I get that. Because here's the thing. I hope that you take this with you today. A step towards Jesus in boldness is better than spending a lifetime in the misconception of comfort. You see, for Peter, the boat was all he knew. It's where he'd been called as a fisherman originally, right? It's what his job was, what his purpose was. He was a fisherman. It was what would have been comfortable for him, but he was being called to a whole new thing. There was nothing wrong with being a fisherman. There was nothing wrong with a boat. There was nothing about that was wrong. But he knew that if he stayed in the misconception of comfort, he would be missing out on what Jesus had for his life. And so what did he do? He stepped out in boldness towards Jesus Christ. Can I encourage you today that maybe where you're sitting today, Jesus has put you and placed you there, but it's time to move out of the misconception of comfort and not sit in fear and step towards Jesus Christ in triumph? Make that step of boldness today. Listen, God called us to Melbourne, Florida 14 years ago, but if we were to stay in Florida and to continue to minister to that church, there would have been nothing wrong with that. But here's the thing. We would have been doing it for the sake of comfort and not for the sake of the call of Jesus. It's what we would have done. We would have stayed for comfort. And when you're not taking steps towards Jesus, you'll live in a misconception of comfort. Don't be trapped by the fear of leaving the comfortable and lose out on being right beside the one who is the comforter, being in his presence and a part of who he is. So you're saying to me, Warren, take steps boldly. But what happens when I take the steps and things happen? Have you ever done that before, right? You've taken steps and you're like, okay, I'm going to do this, God. I'm going to move into this. And then right away something happens. Listen to what happens to Peter in chapter 14 and verse 29 through 30. He said, come. And so Jesus calls him out. And so Peter got out of the boat and he walked on water and he came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. You ever seen the wind before? You ever stepped out, right? The boat, and what does the wind do in the ocean? It causes the waves to crash and the waves to move and to throw against us. And so he sees the actions of the wind moving against him, and there he is walking on the water. And I got to be honest with you, if I was walking on the water and I saw a wave coming at me, this might be my same reaction as well. I grew up the last 14 years in Florida, and I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, near the beach, and so I know the power of a wave. One time when I was a child, I was with my dad, and we were in Pensacola, and what's really cool and unique about this story is the next day my dad was preaching at a church, and so my dad had this great idea. He was going to show us all how to body surf. And so he's like, hey, kids, let me show you how to body surf. And so body surfing it's what it sounds like, using your body to ride a wave. I mean, that's the best way to explain it. And so my dad's like, hey, kids, watch this. And so I grew up with brothers, and so my dad's doing this, and this just big wave comes. And I got to be honest, as a kid, I was like, nope, not having any of that. Fear just entered my heart. My dad's like, I'm doing this. And so my dad rides the wave. My dad is bald, and just in case you wanted to know. And so he rides the wave, and his forehead perfectly scrapes the bottom of the sand after the wave takes him off. And so the next day as he preached, he had this massive red sand burn on his forehead. And every time I think about that story, it reminds me of the power of a wave, that it could throw my dad violently into the sand and rip skin from his forehead. You see, when Peter stepped out and he saw the violence of the wind, the waves, fear came back. You see, when we focus on our surroundings, our fear can return again. It comes back. The thoughts come back. So when you take that step, can we just agree that sometimes our surroundings is just social media? Right? God's calling us something and we begin to see what someone else is doing. Oh, man, I want to do that. Maybe it's the bill that comes in the mail and we begin to lose faith. Maybe it's our son or our daughter who begins to struggle with things and fear begins to enter and our surroundings begin to cast us back into fear. Maybe it's something in your marriage. Maybe it's something at your workplace. Maybe it's something in your neighborhood that is causing you, as you see your surroundings, to shrink back into fear. When we came back from a trip to California, at this point we had made the decision to come to City Church, and we were walking through training and assessment, and that was happening in California, and we were walking through what it meant to be a part of a church plant. And so the decision had been made, and so we had put our house on the market. We had to sell a house, and honestly, it was probably one of my greatest fears because I knew, like, if that didn't happen, that it would just delay things and it could have been hard for things. And so it was a big prayer of ours that God would just sell the home. And so we get back from California and we walk into the house. And have you ever walked into a house and there's no air condition in the middle of summer? Right? Yeah, it's just like, it's instant. It's just like, yep, that doesn't work. And so while we're on this trip, we're praying for that. God, please sell this home. And then what's the first thing that happens as soon as we get back from the trip? No AC. What happened in that moment? Fear. I was Peter. I took my eyes off the one who was pursuing me, who was meeting me where I am. And I began to think, okay, what do I got to do? What do I got to do? What do I got to do? What do I need to do? I need to figure this out. And there was this moment just for me. I don't know, it was a Holy Spirit moment. And God just said, it's okay. It's okay. That night, you know what the AC did? It started working. And you know what happened the next day? We had our first open house. And you know what happened the next night? We had a full offer on our house. You know? But God had to remind me for a moment, right? He had to remind me for a moment, hey, listen, focus your eyes on me because I got you. I need you to call out to me because here's what Peter did. Listen to this in Matthew chapter 11, verse 30 through 31. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out. Peter said, Lord, save me. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand, and he took hold of him, saying, oh, you little faith, why do you doubt me? Two crazy good things in this passage. Peter knew where his help came from. He knew it. He knew where to call. He knew where to reach out. He knew that even though he was a fisherman, he knew the water a little bit. He knew that he couldn't do it, that only Jesus could. And so what did he say? Save me. And so some of you, maybe you've stumbled and you've fallen. Can I just encourage you that triumph is found in this, that Jesus would save you? That you would say, hey, save me, rescue me. The second thing is this, and you'll see this, that Jesus rescues us first. Jesus rescues us first. You see, when Peter called out to Jesus, Jesus didn't walk up and say, hey, dude, sorry. Your faith was a little weak. You're just going to have to sit there and drown a little bit, and then I'll figure it out and I'll save you. No, what does he do? Jesus just said, boom, come here. And then he said, hey, listen, you got to trust me. Don't doubt me. Don't have little faith. This is what is so beautiful. Jesus rescues us first. Jesus completes this process Matthew 14, 32 through 33. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. This is the guy. He is the one. You see, our response to rescue, our response to Jesus stepping into our mess, our response to rescue is the realization of who he is. It's understanding who Jesus is. Can I encourage you today, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you're sitting in, no matter what boat of life God's placed you in and he set you out just like the disciples, can we just know this, that he's going to meet you where you are? Whether it's with family, whether it's with a spouse, whether it's with the workplace, whether it's with finances, whatever it may be, Jesus knows exactly where you are. Every bit, every piece, every part. And so can I take this time just to encourage you to take a step to Jesus today? And that step you may think is small, but any step is huge. We believe that we celebrate steps here. We believe that we can say, hey, whatever the step, no matter big or small, we can celebrate that because any step towards Jesus is an incredible step, right? It's a beautiful thing. He knows today where you are. As I finish up, this is what happens. Peter would go on to become a part of starting the church that we know today. He was a part of this picture in this place. And so we have to think that when Peter says this later on in life, that he was thinking about this story. He was thinking about this experience in his life. And he would pen these words in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6 through 7. He said this, humble yourselves. In other words, place yourself at a position where you know that God is greater, that he can watch over you. Put yourself there. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God. What was his experience with the hand of God? Jesus, right? Right here, boom. Bringing him up. Man, put yourself where you got Jesus pulling you up. He's the one. It's not you, right? It's him. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God so that at the proper time, what did we just sing in a moment ago? It's in the waiting. That's not easy, is it? But God's timing is perfect. His timing is precious. For the disciples that night, they sat out all the way to the middle of the night, probably thinking when, where, how, waiting and waiting. And so can I encourage you today that at the right time, he will exalt you. The word exalt means he will lift you up. Do you need to be lifted up today? Are you down today? Do you need to be lifted up? And this is what he says. He's thinking about this time, right? In verse number 7, casting all your anxieties on him. Why? Because he cares for you. He cares for you. Can you just do this for me? Can you put your name there for a second? Take away you and just put your name there. He cares for Warren. And all the things that he has in this world, he knows and meets me where I am, and he cares for me. He cares for you. So let's do this today. Let's cast it. Let's give it. Let's take the steps towards who he is. And I want to say this again, that a step towards Jesus in boldness is better than spending a lifetime in the misconception of comfort. My family and I have been here now for about a month. And I say this in all honesty, we really do love Griffin. Like, we're starting to fall in love with this community and starting to fall in love. They really helped us out that when we moved from the beach, they had June Jam and they put sand in a parking garage, and it was like being at home. And we've really loved this place, and we love you guys. Thank you for being a part of God's story in our lives. Some of you have just prayed over us. Some of you have done things for our family. You've fed us. You're a part of what God's doing and helping us grow in our faith to him. And let me say this, and I'm done. In June was our last paycheck. And so we've been in July, and we've been fundraising, and we've been trusting, and God has done, he's given us a place to stay where a family has just said, hey, here, stay here. Wow. But at the end of the month, I kind of just entered the moment of fear again. And I was like, all right, God, it's been a month. Like, what's the deal here? And things kind of just start to happen. And I started to doubt a little bit. And I was... I was sitting right back here just by myself in the church. And I was reading in the book of Psalms. And the last part of a verse that I just caught, that the Holy Spirit just said, hey, this is for you. He said, he is with you. He is with you. And over on the desk, no lie, is an envelope with my name on it and my wife's name on it. And I grabbed that envelope. And it has home insurance on it. And I'm like, what in the world is this? I don't have a house. And I opened it up. And can I just tell you that God knows where we are? In that was a reimbursement check for us. And it was the whole amount we would have made in the month of June in the paycheck. Can I tell you this? Triumph. And it wasn't because it was a financial thing for me. It was a trust thing. It wasn't about the money. It was about Jesus stepping into our life. And so can I encourage you that he wants to step into your life? And that he wants you to take that step towards him and say, hey, I trust you. So what is your step today? What is it? What is that step for you that you're willing to say, hey, you know what? If I could just jump out of this misconception of comfort, here is the step that I would take.